I didn't mean to witness any of it, and yet from the moment I stepped onto the gravel path I felt something shift, as if the air itself had been waiting for me. It was late afternoon in Riverside Park, the kind of quiet urban corner where the wind carries more silence than sound, and Claire Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Industries, was doing something she rarely allowed herself to do, simply walking with her 8-year-old daughter. The city glowed in muted gold, the sun sinking low behind the distant skyline, and the subtle echo of children playing blended with the faint hum of traffic far beyond the trees. Claire moved with a practiced elegance, though anyone watching closely would have noticed the stiffness in her shoulders, the way control clung to her like a tailored coat she didn't know how to remove. Her daughter, Lily, ran ahead chasing a loose pink ribbon that danced unpredictably along the ground. Claire pretended to check her phone only for the time, not for emails, though the urge pressed against her ribs like a second heartbeat. And then she saw him, a man sitting on a wooden bench near the lake, elbows on his knees, hands covering his face. His shoulders trembled, barely but unmistakably the way grief sometimes tries to hide but can't. He looked young, maybe mid-30s, wearing a charcoal sweater and jeans, nothing remarkable, except for the stillness around him, a stillness too heavy for a park filled with life. Claire froze, unsure why the sight struck her so deeply. She had seen people broken before, employees on the edge of burnout, partners masking failures, strangers on subway platforms trying not to fall apart. But this was different. Something about the way he fought for silence, as if refusing to let the world see his pain, stirred an ache she had buried long ago. "Mum!" Lily called, waving the ribbon triumphantly. Claire blinked, forcing a smile as she walked toward her daughter, though something kept pulling her gaze back to the man on the bench. He wiped his face quickly, but not quickly enough. A single tear slipped down his cheek, catching the last thread of sunlight like a glass bead. And then he looked up, straight at her. Claire felt something cold brush down her spine. Not fear, not recognition, but a strange sense of inevitability, as if she had walked into a moment that already knew her name. The man's gaze lingered, searching, uncertain, maybe even startled. She looked away first. "Let's go to the carousel," she told Lily, letting the girl take her hand and pull her along the paved walkway. But even as they reached the bright pastel lights of the small carousel, Claire felt her attention drifting back toward the lake. The air around the bench seemed dimmer now, as if the world had pulled a thin veil over that small patch of earth. She didn't understand why she cared. She didn't know this man. She had never seen him before. And yet the image of him trembling, trying to pretend he wasn't falling apart, had carved itself into her. Lily hopped onto a painted white horse, laughing as the music began, a soft, nostalgic lullaby that made the past feel too close. Claire stepped back, watching the carousel turn, watching her daughter spin around with messy joy, while the faint reflection of her own face appeared in one of the carousel mirrors. She didn't like the expression she saw there, a mix of curiosity, concern, and something that looked dangerously like longing. When the ride slowed, Claire lifted Lily off the horse and kissed her forehead. "Can we get ice cream?" Lily asked, already pointing toward a small cart near the playground. "Of course," Claire said automatically, and they approached the vendor. That was when she heard it. I don't know how to tell her. The voice was soft, cracked, spoken to no one, or maybe to someone Claire couldn't see. She turned. The man from the bench was standing beside a tall lamppost, facing the lake, speaking into what looked like a turned-off phone. His hand trembled at his side. "She's just a child," he whispered, voice barely audible over the wind. "How do I tell her mother isn't coming back?" Claire's chest tightened, not with pity, but with something closer to recognition, as if his grief had slipped into a room inside her she kept locked. She shouldn't have been listening. She told herself to look away. She told herself this had nothing to do with her. But then the man lowered the phone, eyes closing as he exhaled a sharp, broken breath. When he opened them again, he caught her staring. This time neither of them looked away. "Sorry," he murmured, attempting to pull his composure together. "I didn't mean to—" He stopped. His eyes widened slightly, confusion flickering across his face as he studied her, not with admiration or recognition, but with something sharper. "You're Claire?" She inhaled sharply, swallowing the immediate instinct to straighten her posture like she did in boardrooms. "Do we know each other?" The question came out more guarded than she intended. "No," he said too quickly. "No, I've heard the name. People said that sometimes. She was in the news often enough, but something in his tone felt off, too personal. too certain. "Are you all right?" she asked, surprised by her own softness. He hesitated, then nodded, though the gesture was unconvincing. "I will be." Lily tugged on Claire's sleeve. "Mum, my ice cream is melting." Claire handed her a napkin, but her eyes remained on the man. He looked at Lily for a moment, really looked, and something flickered behind his gaze. Pain, recognition, or something Claire couldn't place. "She looks just like you," he said quietly. Claire blinked. That was true, but it was the way he said it, as if he had seen Lily before, long before today, that made the air shift again. "What's your name?" Claire asked. He opened his mouth, hesitated, then said, "Daniel. Just Daniel. No last name." His voice carried a subtle tremor, as if the truth sat too heavy behind it. Claire sensed a strange pull between them, an invisible thread tightening in the quiet. She wanted to step back, to return to the safety of the familiar, but the weight of Daniel's hidden sorrow held her in place. "It's getting cold," she finally said gently, turning to guide Lily away. Daniel nodded, but his eyes followed them with a look that felt too full of meaning for strangers. Claire walked slowly toward the exit of the park, the fading sunlight painting long shadows along the path. She could feel Daniel's gaze on her back long after she could no longer see him. And something inside her whispered that this wasn't over, that the moment she stepped into the park, some locked part of her past had begun to move again, like a long, silent clock, suddenly remembering how to tick. Claire didn't speak for the first 5 minutes of the drive home. She kept her eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel, but her mind replayed that single moment, the way Daniel had looked at her daughter, as if he knew something he shouldn't. Lily hummed softly in the back seat, swinging her legs, unconcerned by the shifting air around her mother. But for Claire, everything felt slightly off balance, as if she had stepped out of her own life without noticing. When they reached their building, the valet greeted them by name, and the doorman held the glass door open with his usual practiced smile. Claire walked through the lobby as she always did, confident, composed, unreachable. Yet the image of that man crying alone in the park hovered at the edges of her thoughts like a shadow refusing to leave. After dinner, after Lily was tucked into bed with her favorite stuffed cat, after the penthouse finally grew quiet, Claire found herself standing by the enormous window overlooking the city. Night had fallen fully now. The skyline glittered like a constellation carved into steel. She pressed her fingertips to the cold glass, trying to shake the strange echo Daniel had left behind in her mind. She didn't know him. There was no reason he should matter, and yet something about his voice, "She looks just like you," had pulled her backward into memories she had spent years avoiding. She poured herself a glass of water but barely touched it. Her reflection in the window looked distant, almost unfamiliar. She felt the urge to sit, to breathe, to forget, yet something deeper urged her to remember. She closed her eyes. A fragment surfaced, her own mother crying in a kitchen she hadn't stood in since she was 9. A memory with no sound, only trembling shoulders and an unspoken fear that had shaped everything afterward. Claire inhaled sharply and opened her eyes. She needed distraction. She returned to her small home office, switching on the lamp. The warm light spilled over her desk as she opened her laptop, intending to check emails despite her earlier promise to avoid them tonight. But before she could type a single word, she noticed something on her screen, a notification, a message she didn't remember sending or receiving. It wasn't an email. It wasn't a calendar reminder. It was a photo she hadn't seen in years. Claire's heart stuttered. The image was of a much younger version of herself, 23, wearing a navy coat, standing in front of the Whitmore Foundation charity booth during her first year at the company. But she wasn't alone in the photo. Standing beside her, half hidden by the edge of the frame, was a man. A man that looked uncannily similar to Daniel. Claire stared at the screen, pulse thrumming in her ears. The resemblance couldn't be ignored. The same sharp jawline, the same shape of his eyes, even the same way he held his shoulders, slightly tense, as if ready to disappear. But Daniel had said he didn't know her. He said they had never met, and Claire had never seen him before today. Or had she? She zoomed in on the photo. Her breath caught somewhere between her ribs. It wasn't perfectly clear. The lighting was uneven, and the image was old. But the face, the posture, the expression, it all lined up too precisely to be a coincidence. "What the hell?" she whispered. The photo flickered suddenly, glitching, distorting for half a second, then vanished from the screen entirely. Claire gasped. Her hands hovered frozen above the keyboard. She clicked through her files. It wasn't there. It hadn't saved. There was no trace of it. Her chest tightened. She wasn't tired enough to be hallucinating. She wasn't careless enough to imagine something that vivid. Someone had sent it. But how had it disappeared, and why that photo? Why that man? A soft sound behind her made her turn sharply. Lily stood at the doorway to the office, rubbing her eyes, holding her stuffed cat. "Mommy, you're up late," she mumbled. Claire forced a breath, unclenching her fingers from the edge of the desk. "I'm just finishing something, sweetheart. Did you have a bad dream?" Lily shook her head and stepped into the room. "No, I just heard you talking." "I wasn't talking," Claire said gently. "Then who were you talking to?" Lily asked, tilting her head with childlike sincerity. The question sent a ripple through the air that felt too close to truth. Claire smiled softly, brushing a hand over Lily's hair. "Just myself." Lily nodded, satisfied, and walked back toward the hallway. But before she turned the corner, she paused. "Mom?" "Yes?" "That man in the park, he seemed really sad." Claire swallowed. "He did. You looked sad too," Lily added. Claire couldn't find an answer before her daughter slipped out of sight. Sleep didn't come easily that night. When it finally did, it was fragmented and filled with images she couldn't fully grasp. Shadows bending into familiar faces, voices speaking through static, a child's laughter disappearing into cold wind. She awoke before dawn, a faint sense of urgency driving her to rise from bed. She dressed quietly, made coffee, and stood by the window again, watching the horizon light up with the first hint of morning. She didn't plan to go back to the park. She wasn't the kind of woman who chased after things she didn't understand. But by the time Lily was ready for school and the driver arrived, Claire heard herself say, "Take us to Riverside Park first." The driver blinked but nodded. When they arrived, the park was nearly empty. Just a few joggers, a couple grandparents pushing strollers, and a dog walker yawning into her scarf. Claire walked with Lily for a moment, searching the benches by the lake. Daniel wasn't there. She told herself she was relieved. She told herself it didn't matter, but the hollow feeling in her chest said otherwise. Lily hugged her goodbye before getting into the car, and Claire remained at the edge of the path long after the SUV disappeared down the street. She looked around again. No sign of him. No sweater. No familiar silhouette. No trembling shoulders. She exhaled, rubbing her temples. Maybe she had imagined the photo. Maybe the resemblance was coincidence. Maybe she was projecting old fears onto a stranger's grief. She began walking, deciding to circle the lake once before returning home. The wind carried a faint chill, rustling through the trees, and the water reflected the soft grey morning light. She tried to calm the unrest in her mind, but the silence only made it clearer, and then a voice came from behind her. "Claire?" She turned. Daniel stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, looking as though he had been standing there for far longer than she realized. His eyes held the same ache as yesterday, but today there was something else, something sharper, something like fear or recognition. "You came back," he said softly. Claire nodded without knowing why. Daniel took one hesitant step toward her. His voice trembled as he spoke. "I think there's something you need to know." The wind stilled. The world seemed to hold its breath. Claire felt her pulse quicken, and yet she didn't move. Not forward, not back. She simply stood there, letting the moment swallow the distance between them, sensing that whatever Daniel said next would unravel something she had kept untouched for years. Something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. For a long moment, Claire didn't answer. Her throat felt tight, and the cold morning air pressed against her ribs as Daniel stood in front of her, looking like a man who had run out of ways to hold himself together. He wasn't crying now, but something in his expression, some quiet devastation, seemed even heavier than yesterday. "What is it?" she finally asked, her voice calm despite the unease threading through her chest. Daniel glanced over her shoulder, scanning the park as if making sure no one was close enough to hear. Then he looked back at her, eyes uncertain. "It's going to sound strange." "Try me," she said. "Strange doesn't scare me as much as dishonesty." He let out a breath that almost resembled a bitter laugh. "Honesty is the part I'm struggling with." Claire crossed her arms, not defensively but to keep herself from trembling. "Then start with what you can say." Daniel hesitated before speaking again. "Yesterday, when I saw you, it wasn't the first time." The words drifted between them like a cold mist. Claire went still. "You said we didn't know each other." "We don't," he insisted quickly. Not in any real way, not in any way that makes sense. But I've seen you before, years ago. Claire inhaled sharply, though she didn't understand why it struck her so deeply. Where? Daniel shook his head. That's the thing. I'm not sure it was a where or a when. She felt a faint pulse of panic in her chest, but her voice remained steady. Say it clearly. I saw you in a memory that doesn't belong to me. Claire's pulse stumbled. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Daniel continued, his voice low, pained. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I've gone over it 1,000 times. I thought I was losing my mind. I still do some days, but yesterday when I saw your daughter, something inside me just... His voice cracked. It snapped into place. Claire's heart beat hard against her sternum. She should have walked away. She should have dismissed him as unstable, as grieving, as confused. But she didn't. Instead, she found herself whispering, "What memory?" Daniel swallowed, looking toward the water again as if the surface might offer answers. It starts the same way every time. I'm somewhere dim. A room. A light from a window. Dust floating in the air. Claire's fingers tightened around her arms. Daniel went on, slower. And I see a child. A little boy. He's crying. He keeps saying he wants his mother. And then, his voice faltered. A woman enters the room. She kneels beside him, comforts him, hums to him. Claire felt her breath catch. Her face is blurry at first, like a painting that hasn't dried, but then it shifts into focus. He looked at her directly, and the air between them grew unbearably still. It's you, Claire. You're the woman in that memory. The silence that followed was so deep it felt alive. Claire stared at him, stunned, a cold ripple moving down her spine. That's impossible, she whispered. I don't know any child like that, and I've never... I know, Daniel said. I know it doesn't make sense. I know it couldn't be real. But the memory keeps coming back. And yesterday, when you looked at me, he paused, searching for words. It was like seeing that memory breathe. Claire stepped back, needing space, clarity, air, something. You're grieving, she said gently, though her voice was trembling. You're under emotional strain. Memories get distorted. Faces blend. Trauma does strange things. Daniel shook his head. I would agree with you if it had happened only once. But it's been happening for months, long before my wife, before I lost her. He swallowed hard, voice cracking. Claire's chest tightened with sympathy, but the confusion was stronger. Why would I be in your memory, she whispered. Why would you remember a moment that never happened? Daniel looked almost relieved, she asked, as if her willingness to engage gave him permission to continue. That's what I've been trying to understand. She exhaled slowly, her breath visible in the morning chill. All around them the park began to wake. Children arriving with backpacks, a couple jogging past with synchronized strides, birds testing their wings in the thin, early light. But Claire felt as if they were enclosed in a different world entirely, one where logic bent just slightly out of shape. There's more, Daniel said softly. Claire tensed. This part, I almost didn't tell you. I wasn't going to. Tell me, she said, though part of her wished she hadn't asked. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn piece of paper. He held it out to her. This is why I came back today. Claire hesitated, then took it. The paper felt old, soft at the edges, like something handled too many times. She unfolded it. Her breath froze. It was a sketch. A quick, rough drawing made with pencil, clearly not professional but unmistakable. It was her, not exactly as she looked now, but close enough that there was no doubt. Same profile, same posture, same eyes. She looked down to see the line at the bottom, written in a child's handwriting. Find her. Claire's vision blurred for a second. Where did you get this? My daughter drew it, he whispered. Claire's entire body went cold. Your daughter drew me? Daniel nodded, his eyes glassy. After the dreams. She said a woman keeps visiting her. Claire shook her head, slowly, firmly. I have never met your daughter. I know, he whispered. But she described you perfectly. Before yesterday, before I ever saw you in the park. The world tilted. Claire pressed a hand to her forehead. This was too much, too strange, too intimate, too impossible. She tried to breathe, to anchor herself. Kids imagine things, she said quietly. They see faces in dreams. That's not supernatural, Daniel. That's psychology. She knew your name, he said. Claire's eyes snapped up to his. What? 2 weeks ago. She woke up crying, saying the woman in the dream told her to be brave for Claire. Claire's pulse roared in her ears. No, she whispered. No, that can't... Claire, Daniel said, taking a careful step closer. I'm not saying I understand any of this. I don't. But my daughter isn't lying, and I'm not imagining what's happening. Something is connecting us. Something neither of us asked for. Claire staggered back, her breath quickening, her mind searching, frantic for a rational explanation, anything to cling to. There must be some logical reason, she insisted. A coincidence, a misunderstanding. Something. Maybe, Daniel said. But if it's coincidence, then why does the memory feel like mine? Why does your face appear in a place you've never been? And why does my daughter draw you without knowing you exist? Claire shook her head, unable to speak. Daniel watched her for a long, heavy moment. Then he said something that chilled her to the core, not because it was dramatic, but because it sounded so horrifyingly sincere. I think you were meant to find us. Claire felt the truth or the fear behind those words echo in her bones. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Only a soft, broken exhale. Daniel looked at her with a mixture of sorrow and uncertainty, as if he feared he had just changed something between them forever. And in a way, he had. Claire didn't know how, she didn't know why, but she felt it, like a door inside her had opened without permission, and something long buried was stepping out of the dark. For a long time they simply stood there, two strangers bound by something neither of them could name, the morning light washing over them in thin silver strokes. Claire felt the world narrowing, the edges of her sight softening, as if everything familiar was being pulled further and further away. She needed space, she needed clarity. She needed to breathe somewhere that didn't feel suspended between reality and something far more unsettling. "Walk with me," she said quietly. Daniel hesitated, then nodded, falling into step beside her along the gravel path. The lake shimmered faintly, the water catching the muted light, and birds skimmed just above the surface, wings slicing through the cold morning air. Claire kept her gaze forward, but she could feel the weight of Daniel's presence beside her, heavy, uncertain, fragile. "I need to understand something," she said. "Anything," Daniel replied, and his voice carried both hope and fear. "When did the dreams start? When did the memories start appearing?" she asked. He exhaled slowly. "A few months before my wife got sick." His voice faltered on the last word, but he pushed through. "At first they were vague, shadows, shapes, pieces of rooms that didn't belong to my life. And then the boy appeared, always crying, always reaching for someone he couldn't see." Daniel swallowed hard. "And then you." Claire's fingers curled around the strap of her bag. "I've never seen you before these last 2 days." "I know." He paused. "And that's why I'm terrified." She stopped walking. The word echoed inside her. Terrified. It mirrored something shifting in her own chest, something she'd been trying not to name since yesterday. "Daniel," she said, voice steadier than she expected. "What exactly do you think is happening?" He looked at her, and for a moment his mask slipped entirely. "I think," he shook his head, struggling, "I think my daughter knows something I don't. I think she sees something I'm too afraid to understand." "Children imagine things," Claire repeated, though her conviction had weakened since the last time she said it. "Maybe," Daniel murmured. "But she drew your face before seeing you. She wrote your name before knowing you existed. She said the woman in her dreams keeps humming that same melody." Claire felt a sharp pang of recognition. "What melody?" Daniel hummed a soft, trembling line, a simple tune, almost lullaby-like, with a quiet rise and fall. Claire's breath vanished. She hadn't heard that melody in years, decades. It was the lullaby her mother used to sing when Claire woke crying in the night. A lullaby she had never shared with anyone, not even her closest friends. Not with her father after her mother died, not with Lily. She had buried it deep, in a place she never revisited. Her knees weakened, and she grabbed the railing by the lake to steady herself. Daniel's expression changed instantly. "Claire? How does she know that?" Claire whispered. "How could your daughter know that song?" Daniel couldn't answer. He only watched her with that same devastated recognition, as though her unraveling validated his own fear. Claire closed her eyes, and a memory rose, uninvited, like a ghost breaking through ice. She was small, maybe 4, sitting in a dim room with blue curtains, a boy sitting beside her, a little older, crying, whispering that he didn't want to be alone. Claire placing a small wooden horse in his hand. "You're not alone," she whispered. Her mother entering moments later, humming the same lullaby. The memory was so vivid it stole her breath, but it was impossible. She had always been an only child. There had never been a boy. She had never... Her eyes snapped open. Daniel was staring at her as if waiting for confirmation. as if he somehow knew she had remembered something. Claire stepped back. This isn't real. My mind is blending things. It's stress. It's… Claire, he said softly. What did you remember? She shook her head fiercely. Nothing, a fragment, a mistake. Was there a boy? He asked. Claire stopped breathing. He stepped closer, voice trembling. Was the boy the same age as the one in my memory? She wanted to deny it. She wanted to walk away, but the pieces were clicking together too loudly to ignore. My mother died when I was 9, she whispered. After that, my father became distant, cold. There are gaps in my childhood I've never been able to explain. Rooms I half remember. Faces I'm not sure belong to real people. I thought they were dreams. Daniel's eyes softened with something like understanding. What if they weren't dreams? Claire pressed a hand to her chest, absorbing the sting of old wounds she didn't realize were still open. Why would a memory from my childhood be connected to your daughter? To you? Daniel hesitated before answering. Because the boy in my memory, his face looks like mine. The world tipped. Claire stared at him, stunned, horrified, shaken to her core. She felt something inside her, some long-dormant recognition, shift, uncoil, open its eyes. How old were you when your mother died? Daniel asked. 8, Claire whispered. Daniel swallowed hard. And your father? What was he like? Distant, distracted, busy. I barely saw him. She paused. Why? Because my father took me away when I was very young, Daniel said. I don't remember my mother. I don't remember the house I came from. I only remember fragments, a blue-curtained room, a little girl, a lullaby. His voice cracked. A moment where someone told me I wasn't alone. Claire's body trembled. You think I'm that girl? I don't think, Daniel whispered. I know. She covered her mouth, stifling a sound that was part grief, part disbelief. Memories she had buried long ago began rising in fragments, her mother's voice saying, he'll be safe now. Hushed arguments behind closed doors. A door slammed, her mother crying silently at the kitchen table. Claire turned away, tears burning in her eyes. My mother. She wanted to adopt a boy once. I remember her begging my father. I remember hearing them fight about it. She said the boy didn't have anyone. She said we could save him. Claire's voice broke. And then one day, the conversation stopped. I thought she gave up. Daniel closed his eyes. Or maybe your father made the decision for her. The pieces fell into place like a lock clicking open inside her. Claire wiped her face, trying to steady her breath. If that's true, why did the memories return now? Daniel looked at her with an expression so raw it almost hurt to see. Because I lost the one person who held the rest of my memories together. And my daughter, she's always been sensitive to things I don't see. Maybe she picked up where I couldn't. Claire stared at him, unable to speak. Daniel stepped closer, just enough so she could see the faint tremble in his hands. I didn't come here to ask anything from you, he said softly. I didn't come to force a connection or dig up something painful. I only came because the dreams, the memories, wouldn't stop. And when I saw you yesterday, everything inside me said, that's her. That's the girl who told me I wasn't alone. Claire felt tears slip quietly down her cheeks, disappearing into the cool morning air. And what now? She whispered. Daniel looked at her daughter's sketch still in her hand, the drawing that said, find her. I think, he whispered. You already did. For a long moment neither of them moved. The wind rustled the surface of the lake. The morning light brightened, gentle but insistent. And then, finally, Claire let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding for decades. A breath that felt like release, like recognition, like coming home to a memory she had never fully understood. She took Daniel's trembling hand, not out of romance, not out of pity, but out of something older, something inevitable, something that had been waiting for both of them to remember. And somewhere far away, deep inside a childhood neither of them had been allowed to keep, the forgotten lullaby hummed again, soft and familiar, rising like a truth finally unburied. In the days that followed, nothing in Claire's outward life seemed to change, yet everything underneath it shifted, rearranging itself in slow, deliberate movements. Meetings still filled her calendar. Assistants still waited at glass doors with tablets in hand. Emails still poured in like a river that refused to stop. But the part of her that had always stood slightly above her own life, the part that observed rather than felt, had been forced to come down to earth. Every time she walked through the polished marble lobby of her building, every time she caught her reflection in an elevator door, She saw not just the CEO everyone knew, but the woman who had once sat on a floor with blue curtains, sharing a wooden horse with a crying boy. She thought about Daniel more than she admitted to herself, not with the fluttering anxiety of romance, but with an ache that was older, deeper, and less easy to categorize. She thought of the way his voice had broken when he talked about his daughter. She thought of the drawing that said, "Find her." She thought of that lullaby, the one she'd tried to forget. It followed her now, threading itself quietly through her days, a tune that appeared in the back of her mind during board presentations, on late-night drives home, in the spaces between sentences when people looked to her for decisions. 2 days after their conversation at the lake, Daniel sent her a message.